Perhaps, I don't know, I have been very attracted towards, it could be because of the reason that I've read many books, though I have not read the Quran yet. I've read many books that are based on Islam, and those books were always the kind of books that had a Western gaze towards the religion itself, and it was basically more about women's issues. And being a woman, I always wanted to delve into this subject matter. So, despite the belief, the general belief that Islam is a very rigid religion, I've come to realize after reading this book that it has given small examples in such a manner that it's very enlightening. And Dr. Alim will be talking more about Islam and the queries that you all will have in the discussion session in the later half of the Chapati Boss. For now, we will continue with the video first. Before we begin, we want to have your round of introduction, please. Let's begin with Dr. Alim.
Yes, my name is Abdul Alim. I'm a medical doctor with medical expertise. I wish I had a PhD, but I don't have.
I was told that you had a PhD. I was told that you had a PhD.
And my subject of interest is, not just medicine, but psychology, religion, and certainly theology and comparative religions. I've been studying it for many years of my life. I work here for UNICEF. We have two offices. One is the regional office where I work, which covers all of the South Asian countries. And you'll hear more about me when we talk, but that's for now.
My name is Samin Ahmad. I am a missionary in charge Ahmadiyya of Nepal. I live in Chautary and Kathmandu. I am on Nepali.
My name is Falak Naz Rahman. I am also a doctor, a pediatrician, and I did masters in public health also. And currently I work as a volunteer here in a local NGO which is Air Care Nepal. And I'm also a mother, also a wife, taking care. So basically, for the past 18 years, almost 18 years, because my daughter is going to be 18, I am just doing volunteer work, and I'm a homemaker. Plus, I attend discussions and gather knowledge from people like you.
Namaskar, I'm Richa.
Namaste,
Namaste, I'm Govina.
Namaste, I'm Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be upon you, to the Muslim fellows, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Mariam Siddiqui, and one of my sister who lives in London actually suggested me to go to this program. Her name is Smita Magar. I hope you recognize her. And I am a social work student with major of psychology. Being a Muslim woman, we are asked to know more about Islam, and I find this program very productive, and I'm so glad that I got the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
नमस्कार, मेरो नाम कृष्ण कुमार यादव हो। म एमए को विद्यार्थी आइसक्यो। नमस्कार, मेरो नाम महावीर विश्वकर्मा, म थिएटरमा अभिनय गर्छु।
नमस्कार, मेरो नाम भोजी गुरुङ, म फ्रीलान्स टिचर ट्रेनर।
नमस्कार, म सञ्जय कार्की। नमस्ते, I'm Simon Bhagat. I do theater.
Namaste, my name is Sharad Pradhan. I work with Nepal Tourism Board. I have an interest especially on Muslims, different aspects of Islam religion as well.
Namaste, I am Navid Tiwari, and I am working as a teacher at Samudaya Institute in Kathmandu. And personally, when I have to talk about my religious faith, I am an atheist.
Namaste, my name is Sanjay, and I am a student of politics.
Namaste, my name is Ravindra Dhakal.
Namaste, I am Sanjit.
Namaste, I'm Sovinasha. I'll talk a little bit more about being an atheist.
It's me, Irfan. Assalamu alaikum to all. And I'm a trainer teaching language teachers here in Nepal. I belong to Pakistan basically.
Hello, this is Biza. I'm working with the Kathmandu University School of Rice Faculty, and there are certain centers in the region. In fact, I'm working with the BIT base in Bangladesh, as well as ARF based in Thailand, and they have their own institute called IIT, so it's all about Islam, spreading the information.
Mostly, and she will.
Namaste, my name is Abdul Alim and I work as a teacher at Nepal Invited.
Namaste, my name is Mohan Bainali. I'm a journalist. Radhesham Shrestha.
Hello, Naveen Rai. Namaste, I'm Baspati Siwar.
Namaste, Mohammed Jami.
Namaste, I'm a member of Bookaholics.
Namaste, I'm Bookaholics Team.
Namaste, I'm Narayan Mandari, member of Bookaholics.
Namaste, I am Dhausaki Mota. I love culture reading.
Hello everyone, my name is Vivek Adhikari. I'm a poet.
Namaste, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Avais Sindhu. I'm also a member of Ahmadiyya Muslim community, and by profession, I'm a teacher. Thank you.
Somebody will just name.
All right. So, why did we discuss? Why did we decide on discussing on Islam? For me, I think religion binds us to a certain discipline, and no matter what it preaches, in which way it preaches, it all preaches us how to be morally conscious. It talks about being self-righteous. I think that's what all the religions teach. But then there was this book discussion that I was a part of in the education fair. I went there as a speaker for one of the programs, and it really surprised me to see the stall of Islam, which was selling books on Islam, almost vacant. I think I was the only person who went there and inquired, because I saw that it was written a religion of peace and love, right? So I was really surprised not to find any visitors in that stall. So I went and asked Sajil Bhaijan, he's not here today. I went and asked him, why is this so? Because as far as I've read about Islam, it's always been a religion of love and that spreads love and peace. But then why is it that none of the people are interested in, coming to the stall or inquiring about any books? That led me to becoming a friend of his, and I'm glad that he invited me to one of the sessions in Dr. Alim's and Dr. Falak's home, and we talked a lot that day, and came to a conclusion that, okay, this is something that we need to talk amongst people to understand a religion. I used to be an atheist when I was younger, okay? But now, and then slowly towards becoming an agnostic, and now, I'm glad that I'm in my 40s, 40 plus years, and in the book it says that, it's wonderful to be in the 40 plus years, and I understand it better now because I'm able to look back at myself and my flawed understanding of several things, and I'm able to look forward with hope, regarding my understanding, how it can be shaped. So here we are today. Let's have a look at the video clip, and then I'll ask Dr. Alim to share his thoughts.
Let me just a minute. Let me just start with a couple of things. One is that I was to first of all want to say Assalamu alaikum, which is peace be on all of you. It's a prayer, Muslim prayer of greeting. To start with peace. Second is I say namaste to all of you. I don't know if you said namaskar or namaste, but namaste, which is the Hindu way of greeting. And then good morning for those who understand English better. I will be speaking mainly in English. I hope that that's okay with you. I speak Hindi, Urdu. I can mix it with Hindi and Urdu. If there is some problem, please let me know, and I will repeat my things in Urdu and Hindi also. Before we start the film, just start to thank first of all for you all to have come, because we know that Islam is not a very popular subject. Neither are books on Islam very popular, as Surunab ji is mentioning. So it's very courageous and very nice of you to actually come here and give 2 hours of your time. And I want to start with a thank you to all of you. Let me just start first of all with a breathing exercise, because I think that in our psychological world, in our physiological world, we usually breathe very shallowly. And if we breathe shallow, part of our brain which is not involved in just coping with stress is involved. If you breathe deeply, then part of your brain that actually starts to understand and goes to higher consciousness gets engaged. So may I ask everyone to please close their eyes and breathe 5 times. Count 1 to 5 when you breathe in and count 1 to 5 when you breathe out. Let's start. Breathe in. Breathe out. 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 So with this, we start with a prayer that the higher consciousness that guides us all, even if you believe in it or don't believe in it, is with us. And today we will be able to put all of our awareness and energy to understand what we are here to talk about, and then we will interact. Let me just start with a video which will just introduce you the subject for just 3 minutes, and then I'll start speaking on the subject.
In the day-to-day, Islam is seen to be the fastest growing religion of the world. In the day-to-day, Islam is seen to be the fastest growing religion of the world. But at the same time, sentiments of an Islamophobic nature are at an all-time high. The rigid and intolerant interpretations of the Islamic teachings followed by various extremist groups who claim to act in the name of Islam have ignited these sentiments. Even the word Islam itself has now become controversial among most of the non-Muslim population of the world. What then are the real Islamic teachings? There cannot be any justification or rationale for young educated Muslims leaving the comfort of their homes to join the ranks of such extremist organizations. So what is causing the digression of these young Muslims from the true teachings of Islam? What then are the real Islamic principles which we should adhere to, and what is the right source for achieving them? The real message of Islam is the pursuit of peace and self-reformation, to thereby become closer to our Creator. This message was revealed to us by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, over 1400 years ago. The same philosophy of the teachings of Islam was reiterated to the Muslims by the promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, in the last century, in order to purify the faith from any contaminations. The promised Messiah, peace be upon him, taught us that Islam is a living faith, and the only faith that, if followed, will allow man to establish contact with his Creator and to enter into communion with him. The teachings contained in the Holy Quran and the law promulgated by Islam were designed to raise man to moral, intellectual, and spiritual perfection. In a paper published for the purpose of representing Islam in the Conference of Great Religions of 1896 held in Lahore, the promised Messiah, peace be upon him, explained the perspective on Islamic teachings as answers to a few selected questions. The promised Messiah, peace be upon him, had related a prophecy that Allah had communicated to him about the supremacy of his essay. God, the All-Knowing, has revealed to me that my paper will be declared supreme over all other papers. This eloquent lecture was delivered over 4 hours, and was both eagerly listened to and highly appreciated by all those in attendance. Reports from the local press were full of praise for the lecture. Later, the lecture was published as a book entitled The Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam, and was then further translated into various languages, including English, German, French, and Dutch. In an era overcome with social, moral, and economic turmoil, our one hope of support comes from a relationship with the Almighty. But in order for this to happen, it is essential for us to understand what it really means to be a Muslim, to understand the true philosophy of the teachings of Islam.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm overwhelmed with the job that has been given to me. There are 2 books that we are supposed to discuss. Both of these books are very involved, and depending on your knowledge of religions, they can both be very sophisticated or simple. But let me start with one idea that unifies all of us, and which is the central claim of Islam, which is the existence of one and only God. And I say this because I start the address today with the first verse of the Holy Quran, which says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which says that I start in the name of Allah, God, Parmeshwar, Bhagwan, whatever you call him, in the name of that Supreme Being that watches all over us, who is the everlasting, all-sustaining, and the most perfect manifestation of beauty and love. And that is all we praise from our hearts. We all grow up to understand who that being is and want to have a relationship with that being. So that is the start of the first, very first verse of the Holy Quran, which talks about how does one really get to know one's own Creator. And this is the very basis of human understanding of spirituality, because once you are introduced to one God, who is the creator of all of us, then it is much easy for all of us to feel like one family. Because whether you're a Nepali, whether you're a Pakistani, whether you're a Indian, a Hindu, a Muslim, or a Buddhist, we are all humans and belong to human race. And we are all one creation and one created by God, who is the supreme creator of all of us. So we are all a big human family, and that is the reason why we start our talks with the motto that I displayed before my talk in the initial presentation. It's called Love for All and Hatred for None. And that is the slogan of Ahmadiyya Muslim community which I belong to, and some of my colleagues here belong to. We start the premise should be pronounced Unsan. And Unsan is the word that says that humans have 2 loves. One love is towards God, and the other love is towards other humans. And your love of God manifests itself in the love for other humans. Now, going to the book, the book that you just heard, it's an essay that was written by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who we believe is the reformer of the later ages, and has based his book on all the major teachings of the Quran. So this conference was held in 1896 in Lahore, and all the religions, major religions in the world, were asked to come and present their own teachings without criticizing the other religion. Now this is a very important part of the discussion, because usually when you talk about religion, you try and start with belittling or criticizing the other religion, which is a major reason for conflict. But the principle that was established to write these essays was that every speaker will only speak about the beauty of their own religion from their own scripture, and will not criticize any other religion or bring up their shortcomings. So that the beauty of their own religion is displayed, and for those whose hearts are attracted to that beauty can decide which of those religions would they like to understand better or follow. I always say that religions are are like, in one sense, a product. If you go to a supermarket, you see many books, you see different toothpastes, and you try and get the best for yourself. Many of us who belong to whichever religion we come from, we belong to those religions because we were born in those religions. We just grew up in those religions with our families. We are part of a culture, we are part of a community that adheres to that religion. So many of us follow that religion quite unconsciously in much of our earlier part of our lives. It is only when we actually grow up and have become independent and start thinking that is this the only thing that satisfies me. So it is usually beyond 40, and this is what the book mentions, is when you start getting into your consciousness and say, is this what is good for me? Is it satisfying me? Is it helping me? Is it bringing happiness and peace to me? So choosing between religions is an important part of our work. But let me reassure you that all religions, we believe as Ahmadiyya Muslims, take you towards God. So all religions are true in their very essence. And the only difference that you see is when were they revealed and how fresh they are in terms of their teachings. And as you know, and I believe that Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all religions to begin were monotheistic. So all came from the same God through different messengers of God. So as Ahmadiyya Muslims, we believe that Krishna was a prophet of God. We believe that Buddha was a prophet of God. We believe that Zoroaster was a prophet of God. So all who come from God were what we call the avatars. In Hindi you know that word avatar. So like Buddha, like Krishna, like Zoroaster, like Muhammad was also an avatar, and to him Islam was revealed. And Islam was revealed about 1400 years back. As opposed to other religions, Islam is a bit more fresh because it is the last of the revealed religions. And the reason why we talk about revealed religions is because many of you who come from very educated backgrounds know that in many cases you get disappointed with religion because what you see in your daily life, the manifestation of religion in your daily life is sometimes irrational. In fact, in most cases it is irrational. So I know, for instance, that many of my friends who are Hindus or Christians don't like their priests or sadhus. I don't like mullahs in Pakistan where I grew up because I thought that they presented a part of or a picture of religion that was irrational. And because some of the images of those religions when you're growing up presented to you are irrational, you gradually start growing away from religion. And that also sometimes actually results in atheism. Because if you are a rational being and you're highly educated and you're a smart and intelligent person, you cannot keep up with the irrational part of religion that is really sometimes shown to you through the clergy. And so the question here today is how do you really get rid of that irrational bias and start looking at what are different kinds of religions that are available to you and what really makes sense to you without the institution of the clergy in that religion. And as Ahmadiyya Islam believes, all of us have the basic instruments to be able to commune with God directly. You don't need a sadhu, you don't need a pandit, you don't need a mullah, you don't need a priest to be able to connect you to the God. You are able to do that yourself because God has created you in His own image and you have the instruments and the ability to get direct communication with God if you have the sincerity and the effort to talk to God yourself. The book that we are discussing today consists of, as you saw in the movie, 5 questions. And I'll only dwell on the first question of this book because this book, as you just heard, was recited, took about 4 hours in that seminar that was held in 1896. So I will be only able to cover a small part of it, but I invite you very heartily to please take a copy that we will distribute at the end of this meeting. And please read it, and if you have any questions, do come back to us, to my friends, who can answer some of those questions to you. The first question that was asked of all the major religions to explain from their own scriptures was, what is the natural, moral and spiritual state of man? And how can one achieve those states in our life as practicing, as living conscious human beings. Now, many of you who understand a bit of psychology would also understand that as we grow up, our first part of our life is really a lot is subconscious, because we grow up without ever realizing who we are, what is our name. It's very rudimentary in terms of understanding ourselves. So first 7 or 8 years of our life are spent in what we call the subconscious state. And as you grow beyond 8 or 9 years of life, and in this subconscious state, most of your understanding of your identity is actually embedded in your psychology, in your physiology, in your brain. Then you grow up to 8 or 9 and go into your teens, and this is when you start questioning some of those identities and questions. And this is the development of what I believe is called the start of development of consciousness. This development of consciousness actually goes on for almost 20 to 25 years until you hit mid-30s and 40s. And then another process starts taking over, which is called higher consciousness. And this higher consciousness is then asks you what is your purpose in life, who you really are, and what is it that will give you real happiness and peace of mind. So Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, in his book, Principles of Philosophy of Islam, actually takes the Quran and consolidates this concept of how do you really understand the development of self. Now, the development of self that is described from the Quran actually consists of 4 stages, which almost are similar to what we understand now from modern psychology. Please understand that the Quran was revealed 1400 years back, when modern psychology didn't actually exist. So many of the realities and the interpretations of the Quran that I'm speaking to you about, I'm trying to relate those to you because many of you come from modern understanding of social sciences, and the Quran actually is written in Arabic and most of you don't understand it. So I want to relate that to you in terms of real practical knowledge that is available to you today. So Mirza Ghulam Ahmad actually speaks about the development of self. He speaks about how your spirit, your soul actually comes into being at the time of conception. And in Islam, we emphasize that there is really no difference between the soul and the body. They are one and the same, like they are intertwined into each other. And that is because many of the scholars in Christianity and in other religions distinguish between the soul and the body as 2 separate entities. And in one sense, sometimes you want to develop your body and sometimes you want to develop your soul. But in Islam, there is no distinction between soul and the body. So at the time of conception, within the 4 months and 10 days of when the fertilized egg starts to develop in the human fetus, as a human fetus, the soul is somehow breathed into the pack of cells that is called the fetus. The heart starts beating around 4 months of when the fetus is in the womb of the mother. So it's about 120 days, 130 days. Within the mother's womb, the soul actually starts shining from the first parts of the cell that is what you would call human later. And so there is no distinction between soul and the body, and the soul then starts emanating its light in that fetus. Now the fetus is born at 9 months, and for the first 7 years of your life, you go through a process which is called development of subconsciousness, and in the Quran it's said it is nafs zakiya. Nafs is the soul, and zakiya is what it means is that it really has no faculties of distinguishing right from wrong. It is a childish soul. So it is nafs zakiya. As this zakiya subconsciousness moves into developing some consciousness, the start of the frontal lobe development, it is called nafs ammara. And nafs ammara is the Quranic word for the soul that wants to do, that tilts towards doing wrong things. So many of you who have gone through your childhood and who understand, early teens of your life, you would know that your tendency is to really try and do things that you are asked not to do. In fact, many of us, even in their adult life, keep doing the same thing. You try to do what you are asked not to do, and sometimes people say, well, you have to do sometimes just to reverse, to say, well, I'm not going to follow your orders. But early part of teens is spent in struggling against yourself in the sense that you are doing exactly opposite of what you're told. So this is the stage of soul that is called nafse ammara. Then Islam distinguishes the development of consciousness into two parts. Nafse zakiya is the first part, nafse ammara is the second part. Third part of development of soul is called nafse lawwama. And this is when you start getting into your mid-20s and early 30s, is the nafse lawwama, which is a soul that regrets wrong actions. It starts developing a sense of, well, I did something wrong. And it is not necessary that you will tell anybody, but when you do something, you start to know, okay, this doesn't feel right. So this is called nafse lawwama, which is that it starts repenting itself and says to itself, no, you're not doing it right. So this is the early development of consciousness. And when you start moving from 40s onwards, there is a higher level of soul that is called nafse mutmainna, which is a soul that is looking for peace and gradually moves towards the goal of wanting to be completely peaceful with itself and it's created. And it's called nafse mutmainna. And this is the full development of higher consciousness in a person, in a human being. Now, the question is, how do you really move from one stage to another in terms of the development of soul? And Mirza Ghulam Ahmad takes this in a very scholarly way, and this is the reason why I think it's important for you to read the book, because I can only give you a very small gist of what we're talking about here, is that these are called natural, moral and spiritual states of man. So the natural stage of man is the soul that is nafse zakiya, or the subconscious state in what you call in modern psychology. This is the natural state of man. So you do just what you please to do, whatever you want to do. You just drink, you eat, you go to the bathroom. Those are the things, very basic functions of subconsciousness. But when you start distinguishing when you need to do something and you not need to do something is when you start getting into the morality of their action. So for instance, if a child is 8 years old and is not wearing pampers and goes and defecates in the open field, then you say this is not a moral action. Now the child is trained to do things in a proper way, and if the child follows the training, then the same natural urge, which is to get rid of bodily fluids, becomes a moral action, because now it is being done at the right time, at the right place. So a natural action that is followed through a teaching of basic moral understanding and basic teachings is when it starts to become moral. So the Quran actually has a number of verses that talk about very basic human decorum, which is to say, very basic teaching in the sense that when you meet when you are ready to get married, you don't marry your sister. That's a very basic teaching. You don't marry your mother. That's a very basic teaching. So for those who are sometimes, and I don't know if we can talk bilaterally, because I know you've said from the beginning that you're an atheist. We believe that moral teachings, if you get rid of that moral teaching, then there is nothing preventing you from marrying your mother, because there is no teaching that stops you from doing that. And so the first basic purpose of Islamic teaching is to start raising your natural state to a moral state by saying, look, there are some basic things that you must start doing to turn your subconsciousness into consciousness. And then the moral action becomes spiritual when it is done at the right time with the right temperament. So for instance, we say that animals love each other, but is that action moral? A mother elephant loves the baby elephant. A mother kitten loves the small kitten. Now the question is this natural, or is this moral, or is this spiritual? These are all natural states of being. We all know also that in many cases, many animals exceed in their love as compared to humans. So for instance, we know of events in which, I was just recently on the Twitter and I saw a small movie in which there were two birds sitting together and one bird had died. And the other bird just stood there and died within 5 minutes. Now the question is, this is an extreme of love. But is this action moral? Should humans be doing the same thing? You can't. Basically because you have other considerations. And the question is, does extreme of love, is it moral or is it immoral? So when a moral action is taken according to a right measure, at the right time, it becomes spiritual. So for instance, if a child has died, but the mother has 3 or 4 more children, and the heart of the mother says, she really loves this child, and if she had the power, she would die for that child. So I mean, for instance, if a mother had 5 children and one of the children they were in a jungle and a lion attacked this one child, the mother will go and fight for the life of that child, basically, and would actually give up her life if that's what she needs to do. But if that was not the circumstance, then she would try and save herself, also because there are 4 other children who need her attention. So in that sense, this action of the mother is actually spiritual in its nature, because it is taken with the right amount of understanding and right time and the right temperament to try and preserve life of her own children. So the Quran then speaks of teachings that actually take you from a natural state of understanding to a moral state of understanding, and then how that moral teaching actually becomes gradually spiritual and takes you to a higher level of consciousness. Now, the question is, how do you really achieve these 3 states of understanding and gradually lift your soul into these 3 stages? In the second question, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib actually explains how does this really actually happen. He says that the first transformation of a natural state to a moral state actually happens when your knowledge increases gradually. So for instance, if I tell you while you're all sitting here that there is fire outside, some of you may believe me and some of you may not believe me, right? And this is a stage of belief or understanding that is called ilmul yaqeen. In the Quranic word, it is called ilmul yaqeen. And ilmul yaqeen is when somebody tells you something and you believe that. Now, some people will not be happy with that. They will say, no, I would like to see whether really there is fire or not. So they will look outside the window and they will see smoke coming out. And so with your eyes you can say, okay, yes, there is fire. And now your certainty of knowledge is at grade higher. From ilm it has reached to your eyes. This is the second stage of knowledge, which is called ainul yaqeen. So you see with your eyes and your grade of knowledge actually increases. But some people are not even happy with that. They say, no, that is not enough for me because this smoke may be something else. I'll go out and I'll put my hands on the fire and I will feel the warmth of the fire. So they go out and they feel the warmth of the fire, and they now know with full certainty that this is actually a fire. So there are 3 stages of the certainty of knowledge which are gradually built into how you actually acquire that knowledge and improve your consciousness. Once you have moved from one level of knowledge to another, you have actually moved at a higher level of consciousness. So the natural state of human becomes moral when you transform your first stage of knowledge, that is just the knowledge of understanding, from one stage to the second stage of going and actually observing with your eyes. That is when your actions can become moral. And your moral actions become actually spiritual when you have actually experienced and your knowledge is so certain now that you cannot really deny it. So Islam then talks about how do you really change this state of your soul by gradually increasing your state of knowledge in terms of spiritual understanding. So I just want to now gradually move towards why this discussion is important and why the knowledge of unity of God and the experience and progress of soul is so important for our lives and for today's world, basically. And this is the second book, which is the Crisis, the Pathway to Peace, which is written by the current head of our movement. So yes, we all understand that we move from subconscious to conscious to higher consciousness levels, which brings peace to us. But the really important question is, how does this peace actually gets translated into what we do for others and what is happening in society? So we all know, even in Nepal, we know that there is a lot of people in Nepal who are poor, when I walk in the mornings, sometimes in the afternoon, I see a lot of people on the footpath, who are in need of help. We know also that globally in the world today, the difference between rich and poor is so large that sometimes it is very surprising. In fact, I'm sometimes surprised in Nepal that I see some very, very, modern and pricey cars on the roads. So I sometimes wonder how is this possible. So how come some people have so much money and some people have nothing actually. And this is true now globally because numbers that are available to us show that only 12 people in the world actually own, 62 people in the world actually own 90% of the world's wealth, and 90% of the world actually owns only 10% of the world's wealth. So the distance between rich and poor has been gradually increasing. We also know that there is a huge amount, this is what we call economic crisis. So if inequality increases and people don't feel equal, there's a resentment in your soul about why this is happening. We also know that there is a moral crisis. So a lot of us who are sitting in this room now are at a stage where sometimes we don't want to believe in religion, we don't want to believe in God, and there is a spiritual crisis around us which is engulfing all of this. And in fact, now people say that things are getting so bad that there is a likelihood that a third world war may break out, and this third world war will lead to a nuclear war. And the nuclear war will be so devastating because the amount of nuclear weapons that the nations have in the world now today is enough to destroy the world 29 times. So if all the nuclear armaments or the weapons are detonated today, you can actually destroy 29 worlds with 7 billion people on those worlds. So you can destroy, well, if you multiply 7 by 29, that number is mind-boggling. So humans now have developed this destructive power that can destroy the world. The question now is that with financial crisis, with moral crisis, and with this kind of destructive power, what is it that we are doing to create peace within ourselves and peace outside ourselves? And so the second book that you read, that you have in the list, actually talks about how do you create peace outside ourselves. And this has to do with peace between nations, peace between humans, and how do we really bring this peace that we have within ourselves in terms of our own consciousness to people from people outside. And this is what we started to talk with in terms of how can you bring this peace around us in terms of understanding of our life. Now I'll just start with one very simple example, which is that there is a huge amount of incidents of domestic violence around the world. Numbers from the US, because it is very well studied in the US, I know the South Asian numbers may actually be higher, but in the US, every third woman is beaten up in their homes. The question is, why is that happening? And sometimes you wonder whether it is possible through legal means to stop that domestic violence. Now, you can design and implement the best laws in the world, but you still have domestic violence across the world. Because domestic violence happens in a private setting. If you close the room, if you close the door of your house and you do whatever you want to do in your house, nobody is going to come and catch you because what you do in your house is just your private matter. And no law can actually reach into your bedroom. Thank God, still. I don't know. Maybe sometime it will. But the fact is that your household is a private space and no law in the world should be able to reach that household space. So legality can prevent crime or disorder outside the house. The only thing that can prevent domestic violence or inside the house is morality and the feeling that you are accountable to a higher power who is always with you no matter what you do, whether you are inside the house or whether you are outside the house. So this is why we believe that it is important to have a God-based or God-originated, religiously originated moral teaching, because the existence of God is very important for us to understand that we are accountable to a higher power. And that is the only way where you can actually lead to human purification that can stop domestic violence. So I think that I will gradually now to move towards stopping here, because I think you may have a lot of questions. Two things I want to highlight, which is also the basis of humanity coming together. One is that in many cases when we speak about religions, every religion will say, well, you must be a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu to be forgiven by God. Now we say that is not true. Islam says, and Ahmadiyya Islam that I come from says, every human being that has been created by God has a promise of salvation. All human beings, by virtue of their being created, deserve salvation and deserve forgiveness of God. So you don't have to actually follow just one particular religion to be forgiven by God. That should come from sincerity of purpose and your desire to get to know God. You and your relationship with God is a private matter, but all religions are a path towards God, and it's a matter of your sincere desire to know God, to get to know and get to a relationship with Him is what is really important. The second, so this is what I believe is also a cornerstone of creating peace in the world, so that conflict can be resolved. The second part of creating peace in the world is absolute justice. This is the teaching in the second book, which is called The Pathways of Crisis, which says that Quran actually emphasizes the word absolute justice in the sense that unless you are able to stand up and even be witness against yourself, even be a witness against your relatives. So if somebody has done a crime, and even if they're your relative, you must be able to get up and say they have done something wrong. If you allow your emotions, if you allow your relationships, if you allow your community to dictate justice, then that is not absolute justice. And absolute justice between nations is that nations should come together to stop those nations who are being unjust to smaller nations. And that is the only way to be able to establish justice and peace in the world. So I work for the UN, and I know that in many cases the UN has failed to establish justice among countries because more powerful countries are able to get their way in terms of the General Assembly voting and Security Council voting, and people say, well, this is not a just way of resolving problems. So Islam emphasizes absolute justice between nations and absolute justice between people. You must be able to get up and rise over your temporary affiliations and have fear of God or love of God to be able to say the right thing when it is needed. And the last thing I want to say is that, as I've said earlier on, is that I urge all of you, the message that we have from Islam is that God is living and ever living and subsisting, and He's the cause of all causes. And whoever is living is the one that you can speak to, that you can talk to, that you can hear from. I speak out of experience because I, at one point in time, as you were mentioning, turned agnostic and wanted to understand whether there is a possibility to even speak to God. The tragedy of modern age is that we have even stopped in believing in the possibility of existence of God. This is real tragic. Leave religion aside. If you don't even believe in the possibility of existence of God, then it is very difficult for you to rise in the level of consciousness that you have today. So my plea is that you read about Islam, you can talk about certain rituals that we do, and I have a lot of things that I can say about how Islam and our daily rituals of 5 prayers have a deep relationship with meditation and with creating a relationship with God. And that is a subject which we can discuss later in terms of psychological understanding of how Islam inculcates that relationship with God in everyday life. But I want to say to you, please consider the fact that God actually exists, God actually speaks, and that He can actually speak to you. And you don't need to go to a place, to talk to somebody, to ask somebody to help you. You have that within you to be able to speak to God. And you can do it beginning today, tonight, and tomorrow morning. So those of you who do yoga, if you get up at 8 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, I know many people who actually get up in the morning, please speak to God directly and ask for your answers that you have, all the questions that you have, and I believe those will be answered. Thank you.
The first thing that you said, I think we doubt on the existence of God or turn agnostic or become atheist because of the the middlemen who, the gurus or whoever preaches, and even in terms of understanding Quran, what actually is written in Quran and what does it preach. The interpretations that have been over more than 50, 60 interpretations of Quran must have revealed the teachings in different ways, in different understanding. And we we people, being the rational being that we think we are, tend to question many things, and we just listen to the things that we want to listen. We just understand the things that we want to. We understand. We are as blind as we want to be. We are as blind as we want to be. So I think we need to. There's a very beautiful example in this book that if the lights are turned off and if everything is dark over here, you look for a source of light. The room becomes dark. So there's a very beautiful example. If you are looking for a sunlight to come across, to enter the room, then you turn towards the direction of the sun and open it, and then let the light in, and there's light in the room, right? So I think we need to. There's no need to, whichever path that we choose. I think it all leads to the same thing. And like Dr. Alim said, God exists within us, and I think every religion teaches us to be righteous and moral and rise above from our carnal and physical self to becoming more morally conscious, and to become more spiritually connected to the higher soul. And like I said, it's beautiful. After reading this book, I used to always feel that I've been becoming old and I'm growing old. But then after reading this book, I feel blessed to be in my 40s, because I've begun to, there's this stage where I've started looking, at many things that I believed in the past with a new approach. And I'd really begun to question myself, rather than complaining about things that are happening around us or complaining about anything. I really started questioning myself, and this book has, I'm at loss of word. This book has actually made me, have faith in what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm sure there are plenty of questions that you have to Dr. Alim. Please keep it short and crisp.
I don't know if I'm correct, but there is a kind of difference between the message of Islam, which says that Muhammad was the last prophet, and on the basis of that, if the news reports are right, Ahmadiyyas are persecuted in Pakistan because they think that you are taking something a little bit further and establishing the person you are talking about as the subsequent prophet. So how true it is?
Okay, we'll take a few questions and then I'll come back.
Okay, I'll try to talk to God later, but I would like to talk to you now.
Yes.
My questions are particularly on the implementation of those teachings in day-to-day life. For example, individual social responsibility, that is sharing your wealth with others who can ask and who cannot ask. Second question is what you said, absolute justice, that is telling truth, not telling lie, even if it is against your self-interest. So how they are in day-to-day life, how they are practiced in general, in Nepal particular, maybe other friends help you in when it comes to the matter of day-to-day life in Nepal condition. Thank you.
I have a question. That since there is only one holy Quran, but there is a lot of, I have a lot of confusion about, for example, there is Sufi, there is Shia, Sunni, then comes the Wahhabi, then comes the Ahmadi. There is a little bit about, a little bit diversion of the Sufi within Pakistan, within India also. But the basic difference is in all these vis-a-vis to Quran? That is my question.
Can I add one more? It was some, I guess, a year ago or more. I had been there to that Islamic library there in Gandhinagar. And as I was there, I was talking to one of that mullah, and he just told me like not a single full stop is mistaken in Quran. And later, a Muslim friend of mine, he just gave me one of the Quran as gift. And as I started reading there, I don't know what section is that. I'm not sure, but maybe it's Surah Al-Baqarah or Surah Al-Imran or something. I don't know. But there were two of the contradictory messages within two of the sections. One would just say that like you can take the you should not take interest, but by chance if you just take, you shall rot in hell. That was the somewhat the message. And just as I was just reading a little bit more, I realized that actually it was written that you can take interest, but not to a bigger quantity, to a lesser. So don't you feel like that's just one of the example that the things go entirely paradox, and the guy was just telling me that not a single full stop is mistake there in Quran. So how do you address this?
Sure.
Can I ask a question?
Can I take these four and then?
Yeah.
Thank you. No, I think these are very, very, very important, and each of them actually deserves a seminar. In fact, but I'll try to be short. The first is the controversy or the issue of Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the last prophet. This is very, very simple to answer, and the answer is that the word khatam, which is in the Quran, which is used by the Muslims to say that he's the last prophet, is used not in the sense of a number, because you can use the word last can be used in two ways in English. You can say last is a person who gets last here in the room. That's the last number, right? But the word last can also be used as saying this is the last word on this subject, which means that the best has been spoken, right? So let's say if somebody says, please speak on world crisis, and there's a speech that is made on world crisis, and somebody says, this is the last word on this subject. They're saying this is the best that has been spoken. That doesn't mean that people will not speak about it later, but then nothing will actually surpass this excellence. So our interpretation of the Holy Prophet's status is the best in terms of excellence, not in terms of number. Because if God is alive, and you cannot limit God to what you want to limit God to. So for instance, the belief that every prophet is the last prophet is very, very established in all religions, in fact. Hindus believe that Krishna was the last prophet. Christians believe that Jesus was the last prophet. Jews believe that Moses was the last prophet. This is very common, a misunderstanding that actually creeps into religions, because the clergy want you to believe that this is the only way to go, and that God has spoken, and now God has become quiet and He's not going to ever speak again, because that gives them the power to tell you, look, I know what I'm talking about, and you can't really get to God yourself because God is not going to speak to you. So this is what gives them the power. And we say that you cannot limit God to your own concepts. And one of the biggest attributes of the God in the Quran is that He is Kalim, that He speaks. We cannot limit God's speaking to what we want to limit, because if you limit, if this jug has, this is called a jug because it has two attributes. It carries water, and it's made of something. If one of those attributes is missing, it's not going to be a jug, basically. So if you take one attribute away from God, God will become defective. So you cannot take away any attribute of God, and if God says He speaks, then He speaks. And we believe that God will keep speaking to different people till the end of whatever we call the human race. Now the question is the purity of that speech, how you perceive it and how you can understand it. To prophets He speaks in a different way. To us, for example, Islam believes that dreams, for instance, are a way that God speaks to you. That's part of the revelatory process. But that's just to give you a quick answer to your question. But we can speak a bit more when you have more questions. On the day-to-day question is very important, and I wanted to elaborate a bit more on that during my address, but I thought it's good that you asked that question. So the very philosophy of Islam is based on two loves that I started with. The first love is the relationship to God, and the second love is how that relationship manifests itself in your behavior, on day-to-day behavior towards other human beings. So
the only evidence, in fact, that you actually have that vertical love present is how you behave. So if a Muslim says, I'll beat you up or I'll shoot you, that just tells you that actually that, connection is not there, in fact. So I will call that Muslim a disbeliever, in fact, or an unbeliever. Because you cannot be that way, or a Muslim, if you want to harm somebody. So the very first principle of Islam is that you must be able to protect others, to serve others, to manifest your love to them, if you really believe in God. And the way to practice it in daily life in terms of strengthening your moral responsibilities is these 5-day meditations that I am speaking about. So early in the morning, around 4 or 5 o'clock, you get up, you do that around 12:30 during the day, then 4 o'clock, then 7 o'clock, and then 9 o'clock. And no Muslim is exempt from them, no matter what they do. Even if you are diseased, if you are dying, if you don't have water, so no Muslim is exempt from those 5 meditations. And the reason why those meditations are prescribed is because in those meditations you must reflect on your attitude, on what you have done wrong, and what you must do between this and the next meditation. So, for instance, you are asked to reflect on, have you hurt somebody? Between 2 meditations, if you got up in the morning and you came to the afternoon prayer or a meditation, in that afternoon meditation you must think, did you actually hurt somebody during the first part of the day? And if you did, before the next meditation starts, you must go and apologize to that person. By being in that relationship constantly of reflection, you are supposed to strengthen your soul so that you are able to withstand societal pressures, to be able to witness and be able to stand your ground. Because ultimately you must be able to answer to that higher being who is always looking over or watching over you, and who actually cares about you, about your attitude, about what you do. So spiritual nourishment is a part of daily life. And for instance, in very civilized societies, I know that you do 3 meals in Nepal, but I'm sure that you actually take tea at different times. For your body, you actually take physical food 3 times, 4 times, even 5 times a day. But you don't really do that for your soul. And so your soul gradually gets weak because it is not being nourished. If you do it once a week, if you do it once a month, if you do it once a year, you are not actually nourishing your soul. And so if the soul is not nourished, then it will not be able to stand the pressures. It will not have that constant link that nourishes it. And if you have a strong soul, then you'll be able to withstand societal pressures, and you will say, no, my real accountability is towards my God, and I must be able to do absolute justice and be good to other people. So that's the context that Islam says is day-to-day life.
This is so beautiful. I'm cutting you short here. Actually, what we think is we are connected with a higher soul, but then we forget the horizontal connections. We think that we are spiritually inclined and we're connected, but then if this does not go this way, then it's useless just going this way. And another thing is that what we see as a rigid practice in Islam, many of us might have felt that you have to do 5 times prayers a day. That might no matter where you are, what you are doing, you have to do it. So it can be seen as a rigid practice in one way, but then we forget to infer the meaning that actually it is cleansing your thoughts and reflecting on your actions to cleanse your soul. So that's very beautiful.
Well, actually, in terms of practicality, meditation in Islam is, in that sense, yes, it is prescribed, but you can use it in terms of what occasion you are in. So it is not meant to show off. I know many Muslims who will actually get up during even in a plane journey and will make a huge fuss of there's prayer going on. They'll put mats in the
Mostly my students who've come back from Dubai and Qatar, they say that people stop in the middle of the highways and then lay down their prayer mats. And
that's not prescribed, and it's actually condemned by the Quran. The Quran actually says that those people who pray just to show others that they are praying are bound for hell. In fact, it's a very, very powerful verse in the Quran. So wherever you see people, displaying an overt sense of, being religious, is not prescribed in Islam. You are supposed to pray, secretly, and make sure that you don't overtly appear to show off in that sense. And the third question on the Holy Quran and differences between the Sufi practices and different schools of thoughts. Your question. So this is a general answer to what happens to religions in general. What happens is that when a primary source of a religion is revealed through the founder of that religion, the founder of that religion, until he's alive, establishes some of those practices. But later, when he has died, there are interpretations that start happening, because people start sort of going in different directions, and so many different kinds of interpretations start taking place. So in Islam, two divisions happened in terms of the spiritual understanding of Islam. When the Holy Prophet died, after the righteous caliphs, Islam actually became a very, very rapidly growing empire in the world. It's one of the fastest rapidly growing empire in the world, because Byzantinians and the Romans actually attacked Muslims, and they had to defend themselves, and it spread Islam very quickly. But also the legalistic part, and as you were saying, the rigidity, the legalistic part or jurisprudent part actually started becoming more and more established. So practices became much more important than the spirit, which is what happens usually here. Even in Hinduism and Christianity, going to church every week is important, and the ritual is important rather than what really happens during that ritual. So the Sufis protested against the ritualistic practice of Islam, and they said, we will only do the spiritual part of Islam. And the Maulvis, they took the outer shell of Islam and started emphasizing the ritualistic part of Islam. So that's the division between the Sufis and the Maulvis. One is the exoteric, or the shell, the cup, the outer cup, and Sufis say we have the water. But actually it cannot exist either way. So you can't carry the water without the cup, right? And the cup actually serves a purpose. So the question is, how do you bring those two together? And Ahmadiyya says that this is the way we actually are bringing both of those together. So Mirza Ghulam Ahmad actually spoke in his claim that this is the reason why he has been spoken to by God, is that he is supposed to bring those two streams again into one place by displaying how do you really carry the spirit with the cup to get meaning back into the cup, basically. So this is the difference between the Sufis and the Maulvi. About the different sects in Islam, the Shia and the Sunni split happened around the death of the Holy Prophet, and that is because a small part of Muslims believed that successorship of the Holy Prophet should happen through inheritance. So Holy Prophet's family should inherit, the leadership, basically. But there's a large part of Muslims who said no, it should be a democracy. We should elect a new leader. It should not be. He may or may not be from the Prophet's family, but let's have an open context. Those are the Sunnis, and the ones who insisted on inheritance are the Shias. Then among Shias there are many different groups because they have lineage of Imams who come from the Holy Prophet's family, and Sunnis are the larger part of Muslims. But so the larger part of Muslims still have what we would believe what should be the democratic practice of electing a leader. Now, we are the only Muslim group, in fact, in the world right now that has an established democratic practice of electing a leader for the last 125 years. No other Muslim group actually can claim that, because in those groups, only inheritance determines who becomes a leader. In our community, which was founded in 1889, when the founder of the movement died in 1908, the first election took place, and we elected the first head of our movement in 1908. And we have the current head of the movement who has written this book that I was talking about. He was elected in 2003, and I was there at the time of the election, actually. So we are the only Muslim community which is global in nature, which has an elected spiritual leadership. The last question on mistakes. So what we are talking about is two different things. One is the actual Arabic text, and the second is the interpretation of that Arabic text. The Arabic text of the Quran is actually preserved and was preserved during the time of the Holy Prophet himself. So whatever was being revealed to him was being written, and before his death he actually dictated the Quran and told which chapter to be put where and which verse to be put in what chapter. So this was all what we believe was told to him by God as to how to compile the Quran and the Quran as a book. Now on his death, before even his death, thousands of people actually memorized the Quran. So it is impossible to change the Quran actually. There can be no two versions of the Quran other than of course the numbering of the verses, because that may differ in terms of. But the actual content of the Arabic is exactly the same that was revealed to the Holy Prophet, and it exists today because today millions of people remember the Quran by heart. Even 7-year-old children, 8-year-old children actually remember the Quran by heart in full Arabic. The interpretation of the word interest and riba is a very involved issue that we can talk about, because I know that it has to do with how Islam sees the economic problems and how Islam wants to solve the economic problems, and what Islam believes are the difficulties with the institution of interest. That is a longer answer that we can talk about. But interpretive mistakes are made, and that is a natural understanding of, as Sugunaji was saying, there are 60 or 70 different interpretations, and so there may be contradictions between different interpretations. But we have an interpretation of the Quran that we believe is based on revelation, not on human understanding. So I'll urge you to get a copy of our Quran and our understanding of the interpretation, and that may solve some of those problems. It's also on PDF. So next question.
So as you answer the questions, my question has improvised or changed, So first thing I want to know is, what is Ahmadiyya Islam? Because being a Muslim, I recite Quran in daily basis. I try my best to recite and there are so many questions as well, the way they asked, and I got I understand more. So as you say, Shia and Sunni, I get that question a lot, what is Shia, what is Sunni? As I was reading the translation Quran in English, I found out that Allah has said that there is only one God, and His messenger is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. And then you have to follow his teaching, worship me, and don't bring any people or anything in between that. So in that sense, it's totally clear that there isn't any Shia or Sunni, though people has their own methodology or something like that, And the other thing is that Muhammad Ali Khan, he is a famous speaker, scholar of Islam. He said that Islam is easy. We are the one who makes it difficult, And as much as I'm in the middle of the Quran, I started reciting Quran 2-3 years ago with translation, and I haven't yet completed it because it's very vast. And as I start reading,
can you ask the question quickly?
Yeah, I'm saying that, and it's a kind of long. I'm giving the answers to the way I understand. So as I started understanding, I have to stop. I recite Quran and then I have to understand why there is certain thing in Quran and why should we follow and everything. And as much as I understand, I found out that Islam example is a 5-letter. If Islam contains is small thing, but people are the one who make it longer, And what I say is that Islam is easy, but people customize Islam, and that comes if we start talking about it, it takes hours to. It will go on,
What is the question?
And the main question is that, what is Islam, Ahmadiyya Islam? Because you said that leader, as much as I know, there are many scholars, like Mufti Meng, Umar Suleiman, Muhammad Ali Khan. They make us easier us to understand Islam. But what is this? Because I'm new to this, And being a Muslim, I need to know what is this, so I can get more involved and help you to grow. Because I'm a youth, and I know how the youth mind works, and I'm a psychology student, so it will be easier for me to even understand. The way you're explaining, I was relating with my studying course, and I'm really. And one of the things I like to add, sorry, it's quite longer, about atheists. People normally, I'm not targeting you. I have many atheist friends, and they ask me. So I believe in energy. I don't believe in this and that. But one of the best examples I get to have faith in Allah is the way we created. we were created by the drop of blood, and it took nearly 9 months course to develop as a human. So without if you want to make a cup, we should have the manufactured material. Then someone will come, and then it will become a cup. So there should be something in order to have something happen.
Okay.
Something.
Sorry, so there are other people waiting for the call.
Yeah, sorry.
Please, yes.
Do you think
Sorry, the lady first and then.
My question is that about the degree of mercy. Here you discussed about the natural, moral and spiritual states of mind. But as I go through the book and this philosophy one of Mirza Sahib, I just went through the portion that refers about the mercy to which we show towards the animals and insects, and they say that it's even the person who is like a saint or something, if they pass through a grass also they are committing sin. What's the level of mercy that we should have, so that we can just... I also feel sometimes I also feel very bad when there is a cockroach and I step that cockroach also.
Yeah.
Because that's the way. Because of me, the insect lost a life.
Yes.
But is it allowed by Islam or any religion, or it's just my weakness?
Yes.
Somebody, when I discuss about this with my parents also, they say no, nobody think about this like about the mercy towards the insects like you. So what is the degree of mercy in Islam?
I'm going to repeat what I thought you said, but please, if I've misheard it, I would appreciate it if you corrected me. One of the things I remember you mentioning was the fact that if you're an atheist, you wouldn't have been taught what is morality, what is ethics, so therefore you wouldn't know how to behave properly. Like you wouldn't know what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, and so on. And the question is related to that.
Yes.
If that were the case, and studies have shown that some of the countries with the highest standards of living, some of the countries that are the happiest, some of the countries that have the highest, score the highest in human development indices, those countries, one of the characteristics of those countries they discovered when they did this study was that they had a significantly higher percentage of atheists. I guess my question is if you could comment on that, because obviously from the perspective of someone like me or another atheist would say, oh, then surely atheists can also contribute to creating a moral society and an ethical society. What is your commentary on that?
We'll take one more and then...
Do you think political Islam is problem, not the Islam itself, with the modern world?
Okay, so let me just take these four quickly. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
My name is Mariam.
Mariam. Sorry, Mariam, I think the answer to what is Ahmadiyya Islam is a bit, because you're a Muslim, we would need to engage in a discourse that will be a bit involved in terms of both Islamic language, and so can I give you, for the benefit of others, the only difference that I can say is that other Muslims are still waiting for, there are prophecies of the Holy Prophet that Jesus will come back and revive Islam. Other Muslims are waiting for him, and we say that he's already come. That's a major difference. But I can explain to you a bit more, because I think there's a lot of discourse in Arabic and involved from the Quranic text and the Hadith of the Holy Prophet that we can talk about, which will not be interest of others because they don't fully understand. So please excuse me if I have not given you a full answer, but I will certainly satisfy you afterwards. The second question on degree of mercy is an important one. Now, the Holy Prophet is known to have said that if you don't show mercy to animals, even to a cockroach, then you are not a Muslim. So, there is certainly a very high level of understanding and teaching for showing mercy to all living beings. In fact, the code of conduct in Islam, even in wars, is so strict that it says that you cannot even cut a tree. So if an army is retreating or is attacking another army, they are not supposed to disturb the trees because they're also they have a life of their own. So the Quran actually respects life in all its forms, and the Holy Prophet displayed with his example that he observed that all life must be respected because it's all created by God. So that's one principle of mercy. The question is, when does the principle of mercy become moral and when does it become spiritual? Now, we know that in many cases, some of us who may be just vegetarians, or some people are called vegans, or some people in fact go even before that, which is that they will not, even kill an insect. Now, we all know that we all breathe air. We live with actually 2 trillions of bacteria in our gut. Every day, we actually kill 2 trillion of our own cells because in 1 week, the whole lining of our digestive tube is actually completely renewed. And those cells are being killed, those bacteria are being killed. When you breathe, you actually breathe a lot of bacteria and virus, and when you put them out, you kill them. So the question is life practical with that degree of mercy? The answer to that is that whatever is important for human life to function in terms of achieving its consciousness and being able to understand God is the purpose of human life, is allowed in terms of, and it will not be seen as unmercy if you kill a living being in that sense. So for instance, if you are living in your house and somebody attacks you, comes and attacks you, and you know that they have a pistol pointed at you and they will, pull a trigger. Then if you have a gun, what will you do? You will shoot first. In defense. Now, if you think about it, it's not mercy, because mercy would have meant actually you should have killed yourself. Right? But then that principle of mercy is actually inversed in that sense, because then their mercy means that you actually take another life because you want to preserve your life. So preservation of life becomes a higher principle because there's a purpose to that life. And in Islam, for instance, we say that meat is allowed, but meat is allowed because as I said in the beginning, human soul and human body are not to be differentiated. So what you eat is also reflects in how you behave. So diet should be balanced because vegetable, meat, all kinds of dairies, they're all products created by God for you. And so in part, yes, there is a possibility that you may actually kill some animals because there is a food that has been created for you to be able to have a full balance in your spiritual development. So yes, it's a debate of principles, and it's also a very involved debate, but we can talk about it a bit later. On the question of atheism, what I said essentially is that we don't say that atheists cannot be ethical people. Atheists are, in fact, many people I meet are very ethical. In fact, better than many people who say they are religious. So goodness is not restricted to religion. Goodness is an inherent quality in all human beings that is, whether they believe or not believe, is not an issue. So I respect atheists entirely, and in fact I believe that atheism in fact is a religion. Because you ultimately have to believe in something even if you don't believe in it. If you don't believe, that's a belief. So by choice, you are actually bound to believe. There is really, you choose to, you're bound to choose in fact. There's really no freedom in that sense. So, and I entirely understand you're saying that many, in fact I am one of the biggest critics of Muslim countries where I believe that they practice Islam in a way which is close to disbelief and completely against human welfare. And many Scandinavian countries, I believe, are more Islamic than, in fact, Pakistan and Bangladesh and many other Muslim countries. And I say Islamic in the sense of saying that they have discovered what we call natural laws. Now, natural law is that you will be rewarded for your effort. You know, if you do business and you do business honestly, your business will flourish because people will trust you. Now, that's a natural law. Now, natural law doesn't mean that if you're doing good business and you're a good person, that it can also be spiritual. The question is that what happens when you come under pressure? So let's say at some point in time, if you don't have a certain sense of accountability towards a higher source, you know, even we hear all kinds of scandals nowadays in the world where very successful people have been caught doing strange things in their bedrooms. Now the question is, I'm not saying whether they're atheists or not atheists. They may be believers, in fact. I believe, yes, there are many people who say they are Christians or they are Muslims, but they do very bad things. The only question is, when we are subject to pressure, what is it that holds us to a higher level of behavior? I believe that, to my understanding, and this is a very involved debate because I am not coming at it from a perspective of I want to prove to you the God's existence and whether there is atheism, God exists or doesn't exist. That's not the question here. The question is, can we be moral without God? And my take on this is that I believe that a huge amount of morality that we know today actually springs from original scriptures of religions, which is how humans were taught to be good. Now, we are now in a situation where you might say, yes, religions are not required anymore because the kinds of religions that you see actually tell you that they don't make any sense. So there is a need to actually have a secular framework for ethical behavior, which is secularism. And I entirely agree with that also. But to me, the advantage of having a sacred framework for your behavior is that it will hold you under pressure and under stress, which sometimes may not be true in other cases. I know this is not a very satisfactory answer, and I know we can talk about it, but that is where I will stop. But you know, I know from your smile, I know that I haven't really satisfied you. But let's talk bilaterally and give some other people more. Yes, please.
Ma'am, you lauded and taught us a lot of things. One thing in my mind, if this religion is related with the civilization development or not. If the civilization is developed well, that you say kind of religion might be different, just as if we go to the moon, we make the station over there, then totally human mind and human brain will be changed, and then these all Quran, Suran, Mahabharata, where it will go? Can you imagine for that?
All right, yes, thank you. Second, anything else? Yes.
Yes. Just as Saruna said, I also went just 2 years back. I bought some Islam. I'm interested in Islam, and then I bought Quran in Nepali and other books. But sorry to say, I haven't read it. First of all, my questions are something different. It's related to Islam and all. Is the Quran or Quran? Okay, what is the correct way to
say it? Yes.
To say. And that's Qur is Han is two different words, just like you said Unsan, just like as far as I understand, it must be two. An word is it's just like Anban, and Qur must be there. It's a Qurbani also there. Yeah. Qurban, something like that. I know that is Islam. According to my, I'm just interpreting my way that Ish means Ishwar, Ish a Alam. It must be like that. Islam. Islam. Alam means the God of the universe, according to my understanding. And it says that verses of the Quran said ayat. That it's just like just in verse like that in that Rig Vedas and other Vedas, because it said that no one can write a single ayat that's it's written by God, so no one can write a single is like is that written in Quran. It's like just like a verse or difficulties or something like. I would like to hear if you recite one ayat. Okay, I would like to hear. And another thing that's there are same 5 pillars of that you said. I wanted to ask about namaz. You said already said about that. Tawheed, it's called believing in God, Allah, Roja, and Zakat. Zakat is the to charity, to giving 2.5% to as a charity of your earnings. That is a good part. And Hajj. Whoever does these kind of things or certain other things is a real Muslim. If one can't go a Hajj in his lifetime, then what would it be? Okay?
Yeah.
And another thing is that menstruation. It is says in other, maybe in Hinduism, that menstruation is very restriction. But in Muslim also they can't read or do some religious rituals. Then what is the difference?
Yes.
Okay? It says a different than that, that I'm talking about woman part, okay? And divorces. Divorces is the word that if there is, I have was long back of nikah, and then after sanam vidya. And that's and that I have long, no, because it's many things. I hope never mind, okay. And a nikah is that if you say 3 times talak, 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 and that's it's divorce. But in it's in practice, I think. Yes. That's why that Indian that constitution has made a new law that it hasn't to be. But in that, as my understanding is talak 3 times in different times, no? Yeah. Okay. Maybe that once
So
you have to.
These are 5 questions only.
Yeah. Many questions I have. Many questions.
Can we come back on the second round for next question?
No, another thing that there are many good things in Islam, that religion or something like that. Doing that, you do namaza and do that, your postures. It's not different than yogas, doing yogas.
Yes.
You sit on Brajasana, and you do move your head like this, and that doing hand like this. In Hindu also it is says whenever you wake up in the morning, you just pray for your hands and you rub your hands and put on your eyes, because the hand is the important part of your body that does everything.
Right.
Okay? I find that there are so many scientific that I'm just giving others. And another thing that no, many more, and that Islam believes in reincarnation or not. And another thing that that you choose progress and all things also. Scholars, it's the basis of just like that Buddhism has that is a certain that taste after going there selects their gurus and all, and that you have also scholars then that there is that. And another thing that what is I want to know Urdu word for the salvation, moksha, salvation. What is the called it salvation? Another thing that Islam is against brahmacharya. And brahmacharya.
It's better to say
what is brahmacharya?
Celibacy.
Yeah.
Celibacy. Okay.
Celibacy.
And another thing
I think the moderator needs to intervene over here, because there's been too many questions and people are waiting with the.
Another thing in Islam, there is a last. There is more just one last. In Islam, there is a practice of something like that, honor killing, same killing, same killing, honor killing. Okay. And that there is a saying that it's the married, unmarried men or women does something sinful, they should be beaten by 100 Qurans. Okay. And if they are married, then they have to be killed by throwing stones.
Yes. So I think our friend is leaving.
Okay.
Okay, Vivek, I think you
So
should
we
ask
have
the last
another
question.
question?
Can I have one more question? Like I was just willing to ask you.
Let Vivek ask it. Just one short question.
I was reading the work of Edward Said and from the work I find that the West has a very fragmented understanding of Islam. So why is it that the West always, let's say, depict Islam in a negative way?
Yeah. Last question.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your nice idea. I have two questions. One, since we are working with the Muslim community here, we are unable to, convince them about the sexual and reproductive rights, along with the madrasas, even the mullahs are not in positions to, preach those messages. That's the one thing. Second, I was also working with the Ahmadiyya community based here in Kathmandu. In fact, in the refugee repatriations. So the one who already have a refugee card is no problem. But there are like few numbers who are considered as an illegal immigrants, right? So we have a very big problem to manage some amounts of some amounts of money for that regard to send to Canada. So how since you are representing that community, how are you tackling this all these things based in Kathmandu?
So, quick one. I think on religions and human species. On your question on application of religion on human species, whatever religion, whether it's Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, or whatever, whether it will be applicable to people living on the moon, I don't think so. I think the Quran actually says that there will be a time when human species will be replaced by a higher organism, but this law or this message will not apply to that species. So yes, the current message is only for the current human species which is moving towards a high level of consciousness, but the Quran actually speaks about the fact that this high level of consciousness will at one point in time be wrapped up by God and it will be replaced by another creation, which will be a different kind of creation with different faculties. So the law that will be given to that creation will be different from what we have. I hope that we are all alive to go and stay on the moon. I don't know how long we will do that. Okay, on your several questions. So the word Quran is actually not the same as insan, or it's not two. The word Quran is actually the word Kaf Re Alif. So the root of that is Qira. Qira. And Qira means to recite. So the word Quran actually means the one that is recited constantly all the time. A book that is repeatedly recited all the time. And Quran is the only book in the world that, because Muslims are 1.5 billion in number and they are all over the world. So at a given time, the Quran is being recited somewhere in the world 24 hours a day. 7 days a week, 365 days a week, a year. So it is the only book that is being recited constantly all the time, and that is why it is named the Quran by God. So the word Qira means to read and to read repeatedly. The word Islam means to surrender yourself.
Quran, how to
Quran. So it's Q-U with a comma.
Pronunciation.
Quran.
Quran. Because it's written Quran also, no?
Yeah.
Quran.
The word Islam means to surrender yourself, to submit to God. So it means submission and peace. And by submission to God means that you have decided that from your person no one will ever be harmed. So that's the word Islam to mean to submit to peace.
The peace will come from God and peace will go through you to other humans. So Islam means
the word ayat means a sign actually. So every verse in the Quran is ayat, which is a sign from God. So if, for instance, I can recite to you one ayat which says Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. The very first verse of the Quran, which says all praise belongs to God, who is the sustainer of all the worlds. So there is no distinction between God, whether God serves Christians or Hindus or Muslims, or takes care of Muslims or Christians or God. God is the God of all the worlds, of all the people, of everything that's been created. And He's the one who sustains their life and brings them from nothing into being, and then develops their consciousness and keeps coming back to them even if they make mistakes. So this is Rahman and Rahim. So Rabb, Rahman and Rahim are all attributes of God that are based on the attribute of absolute love. So the Islamic interpretation of understanding of God, it is that it is based entirely on the love of God.
Excuse me, sir. It's not in a verse, just like